You are watching Xirtus.
Isaac Newton's big things that he was into was, alchemy and stuff like that. But he was also into the belief that there were dragons in the Swiss Alp area. Now, these dragons were like these
Find the lie.
floating rock things, if I would believe right. You know what I'm talking about?
Dragons, Swiss
Like an
Alps. I remember
avatar?
them.
Or not
I remember
floating in
the
the air,
idea.
floating in water.
I don't know.
Um,
I always I
the
kind of
quota,
recognized what he was thinking
the
about
the
was
quote libit, the quote libita or whatever, right? The dragons of the Swiss Alps. Its length, he said, was at least 7 feet. Its girth, approximately that of an apple tree. Its head, like that of a cat's, but no feet. He said he smote and slew it with the assistance of his brother Thomas. He added that before it was killed, the people of the neighborhood complained that the milk was withdrawn from their cows, and they could never discover the author of the mischief. But
Sneaky
the
little
mischief.
bugger. He knew how to suckle off the teat of the cow.
Now,
That's how the
what do we know
dragon
about
would
giant?
survive, huh?
But we know about giant. No, but we know about dragons from the extent of we know about crocodiles, we know about reptiles, we know about Jurassic creatures. We do know that there were pterosaurs. We haven't seen any in a while. Most of the Chinese pterosaurs are the most recent when we look at fossil records. The idea that there were pterosaurs more recently and that they just flew away and died somewhere, actually more plausible than you think. And the idea that they were in the sea, that they wiped out, actually more plausible than you think. There could easily have been many more pterosaurs in Europe, and they might have been more recent than we think. Not the most important point, though.
Well, so a
The idea
modern
that
day
there's also
precedent for this, but
bats.
it's not that important. Yeah, I didn't
Well,
mean to
giant.
interrupt.
Well, the last part is just
Just
giant
remind me to tell
bats.
you about the blue-footed booby birds that only exist on one island. So
Wait, what are they called? Go for that.
blue-footed booby birds, and there are yellow-footed ones, but these ones in particular have blue feet, and their migrant and mating patterns are very specific, and those
All
territories are
right.
very well
Y'all
protected.
not even
And that's
ready
all
for
it would take
this.
would be
yeah,
that's
like
all it would
no,
take
like
would be
or
one
they
breeding
actually
season
had
of
this
disruption,
happen.
and there'd be no more blue-footed booby birds. You know,
Oh, that
They
suck.
actually had this problem of there's a
Bye
toxic,
bye,
noxious cape
blue
in like
booby birds.
Western Washington where it's very poisoned water, but it's a giant lake that has poisoned water, and every once in a while a big flock of Arctic geese will come and try to
Mm.
and the workers there, they have like 50 people there that are constantly just shooting birds, or like their whole thing is they're putting these trying to make it impossible for birds to ever be near that.
sounds like they could use some lasers.
Yeah, I know.
Sharks with lasers.
Don't worry. They backed
So,
up the entire Library of Alexandria on Jeffrey Epstein's
oh,
computer,
sweet.
so we're set. That's very good. Did the
So
dragons destroy
Andreas
Hillary's
brought up
archives?
David Ewing Jr. and not to let because shout out to the man himself. It's awesome that you're able to wrangle these personalities and try to coax something that resembles a coherent conversation out of us. And again, I'm ever thankful for the opportunity.
I was pretty stoked because
part of
this
these
was good, but
dialogues,
also a shout out to Nachiketa because Raph has been doing like hundreds of episodes now. He's a better listener than me.
Yeah.
But getting all three of them, Raph, Andreas, David, and I'm not the part. Nachiketa. Nachiketa was the third part that made it really interesting to me because I have not said certain things that Nachiketa did. And I thought that was really useful, and I think it's important that we open up a trialogue or dialogue with David Ewing Jr. more. But it's also been like, hey, after a few months of you deep diving, come and rant at me, and I've been okay with that because a lot of the things he's saying, if you interrupt him, he won't be able to connect his point. So
Right.
like hear it out, right? That's
Yep.
kind of how it's been. But
Well, and so the most recently you were saying that the Greeks don't exist, and it's almost like you're saying it's in the same vein as saying Rome.
It's not that the Greeks don't
just like
exist.
Atlantis wasn't one thing; it was many things. And
yeah, so it's not that the Greeks don't exist. There are Greeks, and you could even say the Northern Macedonians today are the real ancient Greeks, right? Because they were part of the Peloponnese, and the Peloponnese islands are very real, and there were definitely cultural exchanges between the Thracians, the Etruscans, the Athenians, the Hellenians. Like, there's a lot of different groups here. I don't mean to balkanize the idea of the whole culture, but that's what I'm about to do. I'm about to balkanize.
I feel like islands lend to that type of economy and
totally
in
it's
oversettling and right.
It's oxymoronic to an American federalist because it's so monolithic. You're just like, oh wait, how could they? You mean every town had their own team and their own music and their own culture and their own slang? Yeah, that's what it was like. And they took boats back and forth and hung out. That's what it was. And also,
That's why the Olympics was interesting because it might have been an opportunity. Because imagine in those situations, you have the sheriff from one town over who's just trying to settle a simple domestic dispute between like a 75-year-old woman and her 75-year-old husband, and that it's just like no one can understand each other because they don't even speak the same language, even though they're from right next door.
But it's worth understanding, at least as an empire or a caliphate, the idea of the quilt, because this was the melting pot. And the river systems were the highways. And the fact that you could connect Africa to Italy should show you why people look the way they do all over Europe and Africa. There are Berbers with blue eyes. There are Europeans with black hair.
I think those Berbers came way, way before. That was like, proto 20,000 years ago.
Well, I don't really do the 20,000-year-old Berber thing. I think more like 6,000 years ago.
Think about it like a private investigator. You show up anywhere and there's a monolithic monoculture. You're going, somebody's been trimming the herd, have we? If you just show up and it's like not a multi-ethnic culture, you're like,
but
okay,
let's just say, the more important point, the more relevant point is, even if because I'm not helping your point. Let me help your point. Like, let's say 20,000 years ago that Berbers were starting this trade. Well, let's go to Spain and Gibraltar and swim across it, because it's literally like a half hour to swim across that by hand.
There used to be a giant wall there made of copper and iron.
I mean, it's not hard to understand how people were island hopping around this area, why the Phoenicians had to connect, all these different cultures with phoneme-based languages. And even though the Phoenicians aren't really a culture at that point, we're just calling them that because they're the people who used phonemes. So really, Phoenician is kind of like saying Neolithic, right? You've got the Paleolithic, the Neolithic, and the Phoenician, periods, not peoples. Meh.
Interesting.
I don't know.
That's an interesting way to put it. I think the Olympics as well, in the way that you would show people from certain countries all looking a certain way, is part of the propaganda that leads us into this siloed mindset that there were no black Germans back in the day. There were no white Africans back in the day.
The idea that there were continents with unique groups of people, that's interesting to me to an extent. But the more you look at it, the more you see that people were trading and traveling all the time. And for there to be people in one place and another place is because they're interacting. There's no possible way, unless you're saying that just aliens put people in random places and they had no connection, which is, it's a theory. Otherwise,
I don't. That's something.
Unless you're doing that, then the answer is that humans got from one place to another. It might be into Africa. I'm a big Blavatskyan to an extent. I think it's an interesting idea that it's not out of Africa, but into Africa. But there's also some out of Africa too.
Because without boats, remember what Jack Sparrow said? He said, "I put myself here on purpose." Was it on purpose? On purpose? And he said, "No, on the back of a porpoise." Back then, the ichthyosaurs that were still roaming the oceans were huge. I mean, and if it grew up and it knew you, think about that. Something as intelligent as a dolphin that was 5 times the size, that had these big mashing teeth, and was just
that's another thing. Think about how clever and intelligent and large these animals were so much more recently. We live in a world where we've domesticated so many things we don't understand. There's not even
the ocean. We tamed the ocean. It was called a boil, where all of a sudden one shark would start eating another, and there would be blood in the water. And the ocean was so rich in life that there would just be a boil of predation and people evading. It's like one thing when one swarm of fish is trying to get away from, a bunch of killer whales or something. But imagine that times 10 with giant crocodiles in the Nile. There's reported these boils, and mix in again a few giant dolphins and sharks and whales.
Even to this day, you get a small swamp with a bunch of catfish, and you drop some mud blood, some blood bait in there, and like the fish will just go crazy, right? So you have to imagine
bring in a mud shark. Let all the swamp things.
We're trying so hard with it. We're gonna put him through the corrective programming. We're gonna V-chip him, set him out in the wild again, tag and release. We're gonna make sure
spending time underwater is a good part of any humbling experience, because you're stuck there with your own thoughts and you can't really move nearly as quick as all the
how do I
giant things around
MK often and OK Ultra Aiden? Like though, you know what I mean? Like what do we do?
The world is very different now.